When we focus on pushing the knees out, we do not want to roll our ankles out so that our arches come off the ground. Your arches might already kind of come off the ground, but realistically, we want to have the entire foot planted. So what I think about is I think about distributing pressure between my big toe to the outside area of my heel. And when I do that, I really feel like I'm able to really stabilize myself. And I actually think about digging my toes into the ground when I'm doing any sort of heavier lift or stabilization of any kind. If it's a single leg Bulgarian split squat, if it's a single leg deadlift, absolutely. I'm really focusing on my big toe and then the back of my heel. So the reason that I do this specifically is that wherever our weight is distributed in our feet, it's going to transfer accordingly to our upper body. So if you've had a bit of a hard time stabilizing when you are doing any sort of single leg work, you can start by thinking about what your feet are doing, and then that's really going to help the rest of your body to be in balance. If you still have a hard time balancing this out, what you can do is, so I always think about starting from the bottom and then working to the top. So what I mean by that, how am I going to show you guys this? Okay, so if I'm going into a squat, I'm going to get down a little bit. So if I'm going into a squat, I'm first thinking about where my feet are. They're going to be slightly on the outside of my hips, right? Toes are going to be turned out just a little bit, but for me, they're like just slightly turned out. But what they are not is straight forward. And I don't have them straight forward because I don't want to build that front part of my quad, and squats are very quad dominant. So I'm going to have them slightly turned out. This also makes it easier for me to push my knees outwards. So I'm going to, usually I don't show people how to do a poor squat, but what I'm going to show you is, this is the squat that we perhaps do not want to look for. I'm going to scoot, yeah, okay. Can you see my, I almost need like a clear background. Okay, so I'm going to put my hands here so you can see where my knees are. So this is the squat that we do not want. So generally speaking, people's knees will cave in, and that's because they're usually weak in their glute medius and tight in the inner thighs. What we're looking for is pushing slightly out, and you can even do it with your hands, so you can push slightly out, and that automatically activates the glute medius. The other thing to think about is that we really, really, really want to make sure that our shoulders are lifted and our chest is, our shoulders are back and our chest lifted just slightly. So if I'm going to come down into a squat here, I'm going to push my butt back. I'm thinking about pushing my knees out to the side, and I'm automatically thinking about keeping my shoulders back. The other thing is that shoulders are basically aligned with my heels or my insteps, essentially. So I'm not trying to go here, and I'm also not super upright. So it's interesting trying to talk and do this at the same time. So I'm really trying to balance out with the angles. The angles make a really big difference. Oh, hey Liz, nice to see you. So those are some things about squats, and really thinking about where the weight is distributed in your feet first, and then moving up throughout the rest of your body and kind of doing little checkpoints. So checkpoints for where your feet are, checkpoints for where your knees are aligned, checkpoints for how engaged your glutes and abs are acting. So the abs and the glutes are here, and so when you're engaging your abs and your glutes at the same time, they're going to help to bring your pelvis back to neutral, which should be your starting point. So neutral is basically when your hips and your pelvic bone are in a straight line, right? Anterior tilt is when your lower back is arched, so stomach kind of pushes out a little bit, butt pushes back that way. A posterior tilt would be all the way tucked under. So we actually don't really want a posterior or an anterior tilt. What we really want is a neutral pelvis, which means that our glutes and our abs do have to engage, but not so much so it creates an excessive tilt in the pelvis. So that means that when you're coming from the bottom part of your glute and then you're engaging your lower abs and squeezing your butt, you come back to neutral. It's not super tucked under like this. It's just right neutral. If you push your hips all the way forward, you're actually going to release tension on your glutes, like they're not contracting anymore. A part of them will be contracting, but not the whole thing. That was a lot of info. Any questions about this so far? I just went on a little tangent because there's so much to share with you guys. It's really a lot of stuff. Let's see. I think the other thing that I was going through in my head is when you're doing any sort of single leg stuff. So the single leg exercises, when we are focusing on stability, things like single leg deadlifts, single leg reverse lunges, any of those items, you're always going to focus on your foot positioning first as well. So really focusing on the big toe being driven into the ground, and then the back of the heel also having its fair share of weight. So if this was my foot, let's say big toe, heel, I'm thinking of a cross section of pressure. So I'm almost like digging my toes in slightly, keeping a cross section of pressure, and that's really going to help to stabilize your feet. Then when we're doing single leg exercises, the other aspect is that, let's say we're doing a single leg deadlift. I'm going to do this. So I'm automatically thinking about where my toes are. I'm already contracting my glutes and my lower abs actually to keep my pelvis in neutral to start. And if I was just going to do a straight leg, single leg deadlift, I'm really focusing on where my feet are. And then as I come back up, I focus on the muscles that are actually activating the movement. So in this circumstance, my glutes, my hamstrings, and my core are the ones that are working really hard to pull my body back to its standing place. Let me see. Anything else to share right now? Liz, I'm not sure when you joined, but we covered a little bit of info before you got here. Let me see. And this is a place where you can ask any questions you like anything about form, weights to use, anything that's coming up for you that you're like, why is this happening? This is the place where we can do that. And also in our coaching. So either or. But this place is fun too. Let me see if we have any other questions in here. Oh, okay, this is an interesting question. So can you share more about how to categorize different styles of dance in terms of type of workout, like hip hop versus salsa versus Zumba? Are certain forms considered more cardio and others more like strength endurance? Which ones require pre-post workout, if any? It's a good question. So in terms of dance, let me see here. So for salsa, actually for the majority of dance, unless you are doing like some balancing acts where you're doing like any sort of hand balancing or whatever it is, I really would say that the majority is going to be endurance. It's going to be cardiovascular. You don't have a lot of resistance training happening with those. So you can do it in a fasted state. And when I think about my good old salsa dancing days, I would sometimes eat before, but I actually just felt like it was uncomfortable. So I would wait and then I would have a pretty solid meal afterwards. And that's pretty consistent with the majority of steady state cardio, because I would consider that a higher level of steady state cardio. So you don't necessarily have to eat anything beforehand. You can totally sip on like fruit juice or water with a little fructose in it. That would be more ideal because if you have all the fruit juice, it's going to really spike your insulin levels, and it's a lot of simple sugar all at once. So water with a little bit of fruit juice would be a great way to hydrate and keep a little bit of energy going through your bloodstream with the glucose.